Hello, it's Vicky. Long time no see. It's been quite a while since I've recorded anything really. Real life got in the way, and I also didn't really have good equipment to do a podcast sustainably. But as you can hear, I got myself a good condenser microphone. Woohoo! So now my podcast can sound crisp and clear. From what I've tested, it actually sounds pretty good. But anyway, today's topic is the Yi series, or more specifically, Oath in Felghana. To be honest, this obsession isn't very recent. In fact, it's been almost a year since I played this game and obsessed over it. But since I'm coming back to the podcast, I think it deserves its own episode. So, let's get right into it. So let's start with what Ys even is. It's a pretty niche series, so if you haven't heard about it before, I don't really blame you. The Ys series is actually a really old video game series, like almost 40 years old. 37 to be specific. It's even older than me. So the first game of the series, it's called Ys 1, Ancient Ys Vanished, was released in 1987 on the PC 8801, which is a really old PC. Hear the trend, it's a really old series with a really old PC, like bulky square monitors, clacky keyboards with a modem, those kind of sounds, right? So yeah, really old. And the second game, which is a direct sequel and the only direct sequel to exist in the Ys series, Ys 2, was released in 1988 for both the PC 8801 and the 9801, which I assume is the next model of the 8801. I wasn't born during that time, so I'm just making an educated guess here. But I think the 9801 is the next iteration of the 8801. Don't ask me how I know, that's what I'm just thinking, okay? So now that you know how Ys started, let's go back to Oath in Felghana, since that's the topic of this episode. So Oath in Felghana is a remake of Ys 3. So the original Ys 3 was a side-scroller platformer, kind of like Mario. Yeah, but compared to its predecessors, Ys 1 and 2, there was a huge change. So firstly, the previous games used bump combat, where you would bump into enemies to do damage. And depending on the angle you bump them from, you would either do huge damage or sustain huge damage yourself. It was quite hard to get used to this since this combat system is really dated. But I had a blast though. It was strangely addicting actually. Just running around bumping into enemies and they immediately become shredded meat with blood everywhere. Yeah, it was pretty bloody. The blood remains as well. Anyway, back on topic. In Ys 3, they added an attack button. So much like modern games and Mario games, now that I think about it. The side-scroller was also pretty different, since in Ys 1 and 2 you could free roam the map from a top-down look. Kind of like Zelda, if you remember how old Zelda games used to look like. Felghana, however, was made on the Napishtim game engine, which is named after Ys 6, the Ark of Napishtim, since that was the first game that used the new game engine. I know a lot of words, but Oath in Felghana features like a chibi top-down version of our main character, Adol Kristen. And since we've mentioned his name now, let's move on to the next section, which is the story of Oath in Felghana. So Ys games tend to have pretty simple stories, especially the older Ys games, because they tend to clock in at around 10 to 15 hours of gameplay. If you really stretch it out, I guess you could go to 20. But if you're playing at a leisurely pace, sorry, words are hard to pronounce, leisurely pace, kind of like how I played it, you'll get about 15 hours of gameplay. You can't really have complex stories like Nier Automata or Persona 5 with just 15 hours of gameplay. But simple doesn't mean bad. The story has a lot of heart, and you really start to connect with the characters pretty fast. By the end of my 15-hour journey in Felghana, I actually felt sad to say goodbye to the game characters. Like, pretty sad actually. Now that trying to think back and recall, I actually felt really sad. And a game that makes me feel that way, it's a pretty good game in my books. When you don't want to let go of the game characters and want to continue living in that world, I'd say the game did a very good job. And so because it's such a good game, I really want you to experience it for yourself. So I'm not going to go into spoiler territory, and I'm leaving it up to you to go to Felghana and experience the life of adult Christian yourself. But I will give you a synopsis of the E-series, and then of Oath in Felghana to get you started on your journey. So the E-series is a series of travelogues or journal entries written by world-renowned adventurer Adol Christin before his supposed death at 63 years old. His travelogues motivated many people to start exploring the world, giving rise to the Age of Discovery. Meanwhile, Oath in Felghana follows Adol Christin as he visits the hometown of his travel companion Dogi 3 years after the events of Ys 1 and 2. Upon their arrival, they discover that certain strange and evil events are threatening the townspeople's safety and livelihood, and it is up to Adol to put a stop to it. So now, we have come to the meat of the episode. What about Oath in Felghana made me obsessed with it? There are quite a few factors. The first is the combat. Ys combat has always been a strong suit, and Oath in Felghana is no different. It's very fast-paced, and there is never a dull moment where you're just sitting around waiting for the enemies to come to you. I'm warning you in advance though, you will need good reflexes to defeat the enemies. This is not even including the bosses just yet. I remember this bug enemy would swarm you the moment you got too close to it, and it will continuously attack you and bite you. If you couldn't get away from them in time or repel them, you'll just be resigned to your fate, getting bitten by bugs until you die. Yeah, pretty brutal, and it surprised me quite a bit, especially since I didn't have a save file handy, and I had to replay that section all over again. Twice. Yeah, I didn't learn my lesson the second time. Meanwhile, boss combat was even more fast-paced than the normal combat. Every enemy and terrain was different, and I had to learn what moves each boss has as well as the pattern of their attacks. Not only that, you actually have to consider the terrain that you're on, because sometimes the attacks you need to defeat the boss will change depending on the terrain. I remember fighting this worm boss in a field full of lava and using the lava pits to deal damage to the boss. It was pretty cool learning the boss moves the more times I fought it. If you caught that I mentioned the more times I fought it, you're pretty sharp. So yeah, I died a lot. Did you know that Oath in Felghana is one of the hardest games in the E-series? No? Well, neither did I. Thankfully, if you died a lot, the game feels sorry for you and offers to lower the difficulty. Thank you so much, game. I did that a lot, and I'm not even ashamed to admit it. Even hardcore gamers would die many times, I bet. I'm very sure. So many people in the subreddit said that Oath in Felghana is the hardest game in the E-series, and I really believe it so, considering I've played quite a lot of Ys games already. So Oath in Felghana was my first game, but I also played Ys 1 and 2, I played Origins, I played a little bit of Celsata and a little bit of 7, but I wasn't enjoying myself for those, so I dropped them for a while. I might go back to it eventually, no promises though. I also played Ys 8. Ys 8 was really good also. I would say Ys 8 is actually just under Oath in Felghana for me. But anyway, back on topic. Other than the combat, the second aspect I really liked is the music. And oh boy, I think it is one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. Not just in the E series, of all time. Not even joking here. Each track is such a banger and it really fits the atmosphere of the game. It makes you, yes you, I'm talking to you, the player, feel like you're on your own adventure as well. Even though you're probably just lying on your bed or sitting in your chair, I'm calling you out. In fact, I've actually been using music from Felghana in the background of this episode. So if you've been observant, you would have already listened to quite a bit of Felghana music already. Some of my favorites in this soundtrack include Be Careful, Beasts as Black as Night, Ilburn's Ruin, A Searing Struggle, and of course, Valentine Castle. Everyone knows that Valentine Castle is the GOAT! Not even just in Felghana, but just in the E series in general. And maybe even in video game in general. There are just so many banger tracks that I just can't list them all. Otherwise we'll be here for an hour straight, and I don't think you want that. So, I've linked their Spotify in the description if you are interested in listening to it fully. I highly recommend going to listen to it. It's really good. So, we've talked about the combat and the music, right? But another aspect I really liked are the characters. You only have 15 hours to know and get invested in the life of these characters, and I think Felghana did a really good job. And this includes the NPCs as well. So, although not as detailed as its sister series, Trails, which is known for having super detailed NPCs, the NPCs in Felghana all have interesting dialogue that also changes as events happen as well. Not only that, I think keeping up with their lives and stories is also more manageable compared to Trails, since the story only takes place in one town, the town of Redmont. But not only the NPCs, the main characters are really fleshed out as well. You get to learn more about Dogi, who is Adol's companion, whom you met in East 1 and 2. And since Felghana is his hometown, you really get to learn more about him. You also get to learn more about his childhood friends, Eleanor and Chester, as well as their lives living in Felghana. I won't go any further because we are not treading into spoiler territory today. Go and play it for yourself. Oh, and there's also voice acting in the game. It really helped me to get immersed since East 1 and 2 was not voiced and had beeps and boops. Not to say that voice acting is needed, but sometimes good voice acting does go a long way, just like how it did here in Felghana. So, my thoughts overall, it's a really consistently good and fun package that really deserves your playtime if you haven't played it yet. Felghana was such a magical experience. I don't even know how to put it into words. It wasn't as if it was the best game I've ever played or anything mind-blowingly original, but all its aspects just fit together like a puzzle so nicely, and it gave me so much fun and made me really invested in the lives of the characters. This tiny package of a game can be completed in one weekend, and I think it's a crime that not a lot of people have played it. So if you haven't played it yet, do it! I'm telling you, I guarantee you, you will have fun. And that's all I have to say for this episode. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next time with my next obsession. Bye!